Blood is supposed to run thicker than water. But for 18-year-old Chloe Gallagher, it was the very thing pulling her under. Cast out by her own father, stripped of every dollar to her name, her sole inheritance was a rusted key to a cabin nobody wanted. What she found inside that cabin rewrote her entire life. Rain hammered the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Gallagher estate in Greenwich, Connecticut, smearing the manicured grounds into a wash of flat grey. Chloe Gallagher stood trembling in the middle of the mahogany-paneled study, canvas duffel crushed against her ribs. It was her 18th birthday. No cake, no song, no warmth of any kind. Just the frozen, unblinking stare of her father, Richard Gallagher, CEO of Gallagher Global Logistics. "You made your choice, Chloe," Richard said through his teeth, tugging at the cuffs of his tailored Brioni suit. He wasn't looking at a daughter. He was appraising a failed asset. Beatrice, Chloe's stepmother, stood poised beside the roaring fireplace, cradling a glass of expensive Pinot Noir. A barely concealed smirk tugged at the corner of her mouth. "Richard, darling, don't work yourself up. You always knew it would come to this. She's her mother through and through, stubborn, erratic, thankless." Chloe bit the inside of her cheek until she tasted copper. "My mother helped build half this company before you forced her out, Dad. And Grandpa Nathaniel, do not say my father's name in this house." Richard's fist crashed onto the antique desk. A pair of heavy crystal tumblers jumped and rattled. The sudden violence snapped Chloe back a full step. __quote _5 ___. Richard snatched a heavy brass letter opener, then carelessly shoved a small faded manila envelope across the polished mahogany. It sailed over the edge and landed with a flat slap at Chloe's worn canvas sneakers. "There's a deed to his cabin," Richard said. His voice had dropped to something worse than anger, a terrifying absolute calm. "It's in your name now. As of this moment, your trust fund is dissolved. Credit cards, cancelled. Phone plan, dead. You are no longer part of this family. You are no longer a Gallagher. Leave my house before I have private security drag you off the grounds." Chloe crouched down. Her fingers shook badly as she peeled open the envelope. Inside lay a single heavy iron key, mottled with decades of rust. It belonged to the cabin her grandfather, Nathaniel Gallagher, had disappeared into during the last 10 years of his life. Nathaniel had been a brilliant logistics engineer, a man who raised a shipping empire from bare concrete, then walked away from all of it without explanation, surrendering the company to Richard. He died when Chloe was 14. His final will stated explicitly that the cabin was to transfer to Chloe on her 18th birthday. Richard had fought that provision in probate court for 4 bitter years, arguing the land was prime real estate belonging to the corporation. Then, mysteriously, he dropped the $1 million lawsuit just days ago. Chloe didn't shed a single tear in front of them. She turned her back on the only home she had ever known, pushed through the massive oak front doors, and stepped into the freezing October rain. Her bag hit the back seat of her beat-up 1998 Subaru Outback, the one possession in her name that Richard couldn't legally touch. She pulled past the towering wrought iron gates. The adrenaline drained out of her body. What replaced it was hollow, suffocating panic. She guided the car onto the highway shoulder and opened her banking app. $412 in checking, half a tank of gas, no destination that wanted her. The drive from Connecticut to the deep, unforgiving woods of the Adirondacks stretched 6 brutal hours. The massive interstates gave way to winding state routes, then crumbled into unpaved logging roads carved between towering leafless pines. Her grandfather had been her only real ally in that family. Richard demanded perfection like it was oxygen. Beatrice poisoned every room she entered. But Nathaniel had been the safe place. He taught Chloe to carve wood with a steady hand, taught her to read the stars like a map, taught her to look past what was obvious. "The world only sees the fresh paint, Chloe," he'd say, his eyes carrying that strange mix of mischief and sorrow. __quote_9___. By the time her headlights caught the dull gleam of a rusted mailbox sagging hard to one side, the forest had swallowed every trace of daylight. Faded white numbers. 842 Hollow Creek Road. She turned onto the overgrown gravel drive, tires churning through mud. The cabin materialized from the darkness like something the woods had tried to bury. It was worse than anything she'd prepared for. The roof bowed under a thick mat of wet pine needles. Porch steps had rotted clean through. Ivy, thick, choking, relentless, had consumed half the exterior walls. This was her grand inheritance, a collapsing shack in the middle of nothing. For one raw, crushing moment, Chloe folded over the steering wheel and wept. Maybe Richard had been right. Maybe Nathaniel really had lost his mind. Morning sun pierced the pine canopy, throwing long, dusty shafts across the cabin's gutted living room. Chloe woke, shivering hard on a moth-eaten canvas sofa. A thin wool blanket from her car trunk was pulled tight to her chin. Daylight made everything worse. Dust blanketed every surface in thick layers. Floorboards buckled beneath her weight. The air hung heavy. Mildew, damp earth, old paper. She spent the first hours ripping down massive cobwebs, dragging waterlogged furniture out onto the front lawn. Her stomach growled sharp and mean, a reminder that her bank account was nearly hollow. She needed a plan. Sell the 20 acres, or at minimum, insulate the cabin enough to survive winter. Around noon, the unmistakable crunch of heavy boots on gravel. Chloe went still. Her pulse slammed against her ribs. She grabbed a solid iron fire poker from the stone hearth and moved toward the front window. Through the filthy glass, she saw a tall man in a red flannel shirt and a worn canvas jacket. He stood beside her Subaru, studying the Connecticut plates. Chloe eased the front door open. The poker stayed hidden behind her leg. __quote_10___. Her voice came out steadier than her hands. The man startled, spinning around. Weathered face, calloused hands built by years of labor, and surprisingly gentle hazel eyes. Quote 11, quote 12, she said carefully, stepping onto the groaning porch. Tobias let out a low whistle, pulled off his faded cap, and ran a hand through dark hair. Chloe's hand found the doorframe. Her knuckles went white. "My dad? Richard Gallagher?" "Yeah," Tobias said, shifting his weight. "Had an entire crew, aggressive surveyors, a heavy-duty demolition team up from Albany. Said the place was a major structural hazard. They were prepping to bulldoze the whole lot before month's end. I told them they couldn't just flatten Nathaniel's place without proper notice. They waved a stack of legal paperwork in my face." The air left Chloe's lungs. Richard had dropped the probate suit. He'd handed her that deed yesterday because he knew she was broke, knew she'd come running straight here. But why dispatch a demolition crew before she'd even taken possession? If the cabin was truly worthless, why pour tens of thousands into flattening it immediately? "Tobias," Chloe said slowly, her thoughts spiraling towards something terrifying. "Did they get inside the cabin?" "Tried to," Tobias answered, gesturing at the front door. But Nathaniel fitted solid steel-reinforced doors beneath the wood paneling back in 2012. You'd need an industrial blowtorch or the master key to breach them. The crew got frustrated. They were planning to just level the whole structure with an excavator next Tuesday and pick through the rubble. Chloe swallowed hard. "Thank you, Tobias. I think I need to be alone right now to figure this out." After Tobias left, promising her the neighbors looked out for one another, Chloe bolted the heavy door. Her mind wouldn't stop turning. Her grandfather hadn't simply retreated into the woods. He had fortified this cabin like a vault. She tore through the room, exhaustion obliterated by raw adrenaline. Old wooden bookshelves, ransacked. Empty kitchen cabinets, gutted. Loose, rotting rugs, ripped aside. There had to be a reason Richard wanted this place reduced to dust so desperately. He didn't care about the heavily wooded acreage. He wanted something buried. Hours bled away. Coated in soot, sweat, and cobwebs, Chloe collapsed onto the floorboards before the massive stone fireplace. She stared at the blackened bricks, utterly defeated. Nathaniel's cryptic words circled back through her skull. The world only sees the paint, Chloe. They never bother to check the canvas. She fished the rusted key from her pocket. It had turned the front lock without resistance. But studying it now in the pale light, she noticed its unusual length. The teeth were intricate, asymmetrical, impossibly complex. Far too elaborate for any standard deadbolt. Chloe crawled towards a massive hearth, dragging trembling fingers across its cold, rough stones. She recalled how Nathaniel had obsessed over masonry. Stones hold deep memories, he used to say. She pressed into the thick mortar joints. Nothing gave. She shifted to the wide wooden mantelpiece, scanning the hand-carved panorama. Pine trees, bears, wolves, all whittled by Nathaniel's own hands. Then she froze. The wolf on the far right edge. Its eye was an empty hole. Perfectly round, impossibly deep, unlike any of the others. Chloe held her breath. With shaking hands, she raised the rusted key and guided it into the wooden wolf's eye socket. It glided in without friction, a perfect fit. She turned it to the right. A heavy mechanical clack reverberated from somewhere deep behind the stone wall. The entire right section of brickwork swung inward on concealed heavy-duty steel hinges, exposing a dark, narrow concrete staircase that plunged straight down beneath the cabin's foundation. Stale, freezing air rushed against her face. She pulled out her phone, switched on the LED flashlight, and gripped the iron fire poker tight in her right hand. One step at a time, she descended into absolute blackness. The basement bore no resemblance to the rotting cabin overhead. It was pristine, immaculate. Lined with thick, bunker-grade concrete walls, modern, high-end dehumidifiers hummed softly in the corners, still operational on some independent power grid. At the center of the vast space stood a massive, state-of-the-art server rack. Faint green and blue indicator lights blinked steadily, fed by a sprawling off-grid solar battery bank. But the glowing servers weren't what made Chloe's fingers go slack. The iron fire poker hit the concrete floor with a sharp clang. Against the far wall, 10 wooden pallets stacked with care. Hundreds of heavy olive-green canvas bags sat atop them. One bag had toppled, its contents spilled across the floor. Heavy, gleaming gold Krugerrand coins caught the beam of her phone. Millions of dollars in untraceable physical wealth, and there, at the room's center, spread across a massive steel drafting table, hundreds of highly classified blueprints, legal contracts, surveillance photographs. Pinned to the middle of a large corkboard was a high-resolution image of her father, Richard Gallagher, clasping hands with a notorious, internationally sanctioned arms dealer. A thick red marker had slashed a vicious, jagged X across Richard's smiling face. Underneath that nightmare of a photograph, scrawled in her grandfather's urgent but meticulous hand, sat a massive leather ledger. This wasn't some record of shipping lanes or cargo manifests. This was a catalogue of illegal arms deals, political payoffs funneled to sitting senators, precise logs tracking contraband moved through shadow corridors spanning the globe, all under the banner of Gallagher Logistics. Nathaniel hadn't lost his mind. He'd uncovered the truth. His own son had gutted the family empire from the inside, hollowed it out, and rebuilt it as a front for a sprawling international criminal operation. And Nathaniel had spent his final decade alive, quietly, patiently, constructing the ultimate deadman switch, something no one could dismantle. Chloe moved toward the desk. A reflection ghosted across the dark screen of a computer terminal. She lifted a thick, leather-bound journal positioned neatly atop the ledger. Stamped into the cover in brilliant gold leaf was a single line. For Chloe, use the gold to survive, and use the truth to burn his empire to the ground. She hadn't just been cast out. She'd been appointed executioner. Ice-cold adrenaline surged through her as she stood before the glowing terminal deep in that underground bunker. The green cursor blinked on the oversized, curved Dell monitor, mocking her. Nathaniel had engineered this digital guillotine with surgical precision, but the system sat locked behind military-grade encryption. One prompt waited at the center of the black screen. Identify the canvas. Chloe dropped into the heavy Herman Miller chair, her thoughts spiraling back to those summers on the porch overhead. Whittling wood, listening. The world only sees the fresh paint, Chloe. They never bothered to check the canvas underneath. Her fingers hovered over the mechanical keyboard, shaking. What was a canvas? She cycled through his paintings, his books, those yellowed nautical charts. Then it hit. The afternoon he taught her to grind minerals with linseed oil to make pigment. He'd painted a small, clumsy sailboat on a scrap of rough canvas, flipped it over, written a date on the back, the date her mother died. Her hands moved fast. August 1st, 2006. The screen pulsed red. Access denied. 2 attempts remaining. Panic locked around her throat like a fist. A localized security system like this fails a password and the entire hard drive could wipe itself clean. She squeezed her eyes shut, tried to recall the exact carving etched into the fireplace upstairs. The wolf, the blind eye. His voice surfaced again, warning her about Richard. Your father builds cages, Chloe. I build keys. Her eyes snapped open. The canvas wasn't a painting at all. The canvas was the foundation, the bedrock beneath Gallagher Global Logistics itself. She typed the original incorporation date, followed by the name of his first cargo vessel. 1978, Providence. The screen blazed solid blue. A progress bar streaked across the monitor, and then thousands of nested folders erupted across the desktop. Chloe opened the master directory, the Carthage files. What filled that screen made her stomach fold in on itself. Nathaniel hadn't gathered whispers and hearsay. He had intercepted and archived terabytes of internal corporate communications, banking records, and encrypted satellite imagery. She clicked into a folder labeled Antwerp Customs. High-resolution photographs filled the screen. Gallagher shipping containers, officially logged as heavy agricultural equipment destined for Eastern Europe, being offloaded by armed paramilitary units. The corresponding invoices traced payments through phantom shell companies registered in the Cayman Islands. A separate document titled Project Chimera laid bare how Richard circumvented federal export controls by breaking down advanced drone systems and shipping individual components disguised as civilian automotive parts. She had to copy everything, now. She tore through the drawers of the steel drafting table until her hand closed around a heavy, rubberized Kingston Iron Key flash drive. She jammed it into the terminal and launched a mass transfer. The progress bar materialized. Estimated time, 14 minutes. Then a sound from the world above, the unmistakable slam of a vehicle door. Chloe went rigid. The security monitors bolted above the server rack blinked awake. Exterior cameras, concealed inside birdhouses and hollowed-out tree trunks, revealed a black Cadillac Escalade parked hard on the front lawn. These were not the scrapyard thugs Tobias had warned her about. 4 figures emerged from the vehicle, dressed in crisp, dark tactical gear, moving in lockstep like a unit that had rehearsed violence. Leading them was a face Chloe knew from her father's corporate galas, Victor Sterling. On paper, Vice President of Risk Management at Gallagher Logistics. In practice, Richard's personal fixer. The man you called when a multi-million-dollar problem needed to stop existing. Victor drew a suppressed pistol from his shoulder holster. He pointed 2 of his men toward the cabin's perimeter. Chloe stared at the monitor, paralyzed. The data transfer set at 30%. Above her, the floorboards screamed. A steel battering ram slammed into the reinforced front door. Thud. Thud. Crack. Splintering wood rang down the concrete stairwell. Then came the heavy, deliberate footsteps of Victor Sterling crossing the living room. "Tear the place apart." His voice filtered down the shaft, flat, muffled, surgical. Richard said the old man was paranoid. "Look for false walls, floor safes, anything unusual." A pause. "And if the girl is here, you know the protocol." Chloe's chest seized. The protocol. Her own father had signed off on eliminating her. The progress bar dragged itself to 70%. Overhead, furniture shattered. Books hit the floor. Floorboards were pried loose one by one. It was a countdown until they examined the massive stone fireplace. One of the mercenaries spoke on the monitor feed. Victor's face filled the hidden camera frame. "Find the release mechanism. Get a sledgehammer from the truck." Chloe couldn't wait. At 92%, she ripped the Kingston drive from the USB port. Whatever she had would have to be enough. She jammed the drive into her pocket, seized Nathaniel's leather ledger, and unzipped the canvas duffel. She dumped her clothes onto the concrete and started fisting heavy gold Krugerrand coins into the bag. Roughly 40 pounds before it became impossible to carry. Enough to survive. She needed an exit. Her eyes swept the bunker walls. There, behind the massive server rack, half buried under thick bundles of Ethernet cables. A heavy circular steel hatch. Nathaniel would never have built a panic room without a second way out. She ran for it, hauling the duffel across her shoulder. She grabbed the rusty iron wheel and cranked. It shrieked, metal grinding on metal. Upstairs, Victor froze. "Did you hear that? Beneath the floor. Blow the hinges on the fireplace, now!" Chloe threw every ounce of her weight into the wheel. The rust seal cracked. The hatch swung wide, revealing a dark, narrow, corrugated metal pipe angling downward into raw earth. She dove in head first, dragging the bag of gold behind her. A massive explosion tore through the cabin above. Dust and concrete rained into the bunker as the secret door was blasted apart. Chloe clawed down the pitch-black tunnel, knees shredding against cold, jagged metal. The pipe stretched endlessly. The air turned damp, thick with the smell of iron and wet clay. Behind her, furious shouts. Victor's men pouring into the bunker. __quote_31__. Victor's roar echoed down the pipe like a gunshot. "Find the tunnel exit! Call Richard! Tell him the asset has gone rogue!" Chloe pushed harder. Her lungs burned white. Then, a faint razor of moonlight ahead. She forced through a heavy grate buried in blackberry thicket, tumbling into freezing mud on the forest floor. Roughly 200 yards from the cabin, down near the edge of the roaring creek. She did not look back. She crushed the bag of gold against her ribs and ran, plunging through dense, merciless woods, letting the rush of the water swallow her footsteps. The shadow war had officially begun. Rain slicked the neon-lit streets of Syracuse as Chloe pulled the Subaru into a dark, forgotten alley behind a crumbling strip mall. 2 full days had passed since the bunker. She'd driven back roads the entire time, avoiding every major highway. Sleep came in her locked car with a tire iron across her lap. Exhaustion and hunger gnawed at her in equal measure, and beneath both, the constant awareness that she was the most wanted woman on the East Coast. She tugged her damp hood low and stepped into a barred window storefront. Dominic's Gold and Silver. Cheap cigar smoke and ammonia hit her immediately. The man behind bulletproof glass didn't bother looking up from his phone. Chloe pushed 2 heavy Krugerrands through the metal slot. "I need cash, unmarked, small bills." He raised a jeweler's loop. His eyebrows lifted. "Mint condition South African imports. Serious weight. 3 grand for the pair. Take it or leave it." Highway robbery. Those coins were worth nearly 4 times that. But a legitimate bank meant a paper trail, and a paper trail meant a coffin. "Deal," she said flatly. She stuffed the thick wad of 20s into her pockets, then walked to a nearby electronics shop and bought a cheap prepaid burner phone and a refurbished Dell laptop. A dingy roadside motel, cash at the counter, deadbolt thrown. She sat on the sagging mattress and booted the laptop, sliding the Kingston drive into its port. She needed a megaphone, someone with the reach and the spine to dismantle a multi-billion-dollar empire without folding under pressure. Hours of research into independent investigative journalists. Then she found him, Jonathan Reed, Pulitzer-winning senior correspondent for The Sentinel, an aggressive independent news bureau out of Washington, D.C. The man had a track record of gutting corrupt corporate giants, and he never, ever gave up a source. Through an encrypted email client, she sent one message. "I have the Carthage files. Gallagher Global Logistics is a front. Meet me in Philadelphia, 30th Street Station, tomorrow at noon." She attached a single heavily redacted invoice from the Antwerp shipments as proof. 10 minutes. That's all it took. His reply lit up her screen. __quote _35 __. The following afternoon, the soaring vaulted ceilings of 30th Street Station hummed with thousands of rushing commuters. Chloe perched at a small round table beside a busy coffee kiosk, her gaze sweeping the crowd. She spotted him instantly. Jonathan Reed, late 40s, rumpled tweed jacket, holding the vintage magazine exactly as promised. She stood, grabbed her coffee, walked past him and dropped a folded napkin onto his table. It read, Quote 36. 10 minutes later, the train pulled forward, the station sliding away behind them. Chloe took a window seat, the heavy canvas bag secured between her feet. Jonathan settled into the seat across from her. His eyes were sharp, calculating. He kept his voice just above a whisper. Chloe slid the encrypted laptop across a narrow table. Jonathan opened the laptop, started scrolling through the decrypted files. For a long stretch, the only sound was the rhythmic hammering of wheels on track. Color bled from his face slowly, like watching a photograph fade. He adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses with unsteady fingers. Chloe's knuckles whitened against the table's edge. Jonathan didn't respond right away. His eyes had locked onto a specific sequence of offshore bank routing numbers in Nathaniel's ledger. He reached into his own bag, produced a specialized reference drive, and began cross-referencing the digits. __quote _45 __. Jonathan spoke slowly, lifting his gaze to meet hers with an expression that could freeze bone marrow. __quote _46 __. Chloe leaned forward, pulling the laptop closer. Quote 47, quote 48. Jonathan tapped the screen. Quote 49. The air evacuated from Chloe's lungs. Her blood crystallized. Croft. That's Beatrice's maiden name. My stepmother. Your father isn't the architect here, Chloe. Jonathan's voice carried something close to dread. ___quote _52 _____. Before the full horror of that revelation could settle, Jonathan's burner phone rattled violently against the table. He glanced down, his eyes blew wide. He slammed the laptop shut and seized Chloe's arm. His tone left zero room for debate. Chloe pulled back. Jonathan turned the phone screen toward her. A breaking news banner from CNN ___quote _55 ___. Beatrice hadn't simply destroyed the cabin. She had killed Tobias, pinned the explosion on Chloe, then turned the full weight of the federal government against an 18-year-old girl. Chloe watched the landscape smear past the window as the truth carved itself into her chest. She wasn't battling a corrupt CEO anymore. She was at war with an international syndicate. And every door she might run through had just been nailed shut. Rain hammered the shattered skylights of a derelict textile factory on the outskirts of North Philadelphia. Jonathan had pulled her off the train 2 stops early, commandeered a delivery truck and brought them here. A forgotten off-grid safe house. Pale streetlight filtered through grime-caked windows, illuminating columns of floating dust. Jonathan's fingers flew across a heavy military-grade field laptop, bypassing standard internet service providers to connect through an encrypted satellite uplink. Beatrice's people already compromised the cellular networks. Sweat gathered at his temples. They pushed that FBI alert specifically to isolate you. Walk into a police station right now, and you'll suffer a fatal accident in holding before a lawyer even knows your name. We broadcast the Carthage files to every major global news outlet at once. That's the only shield left. Chloe paced the cracked concrete, arms cinched tight around herself. The heavy canvas bag of gold slumped in the corner. Less lifeline now, more anchor dragging her under. How long until the upload finishes? 10 minutes. Jonathan struck the enter key. A progress bar materialized on screen, crawling toward 2%. Once this reaches the dark web and the international press servers, Beatrice's shadow empire collapses. Treasury, Interpol, the CIA, they'll have no choice but to move. But we're exposed until that bar reaches 100%. Footsteps rose from the factory's lower levels. Slow, deliberate, heavy. Chloe's blood went cold. She retreated from the stairwell, eyes sweeping the cavernous space for anything she could use. But there was only rusted machinery and hollow wooden crates. Jonathan stopped typing. His hand slid beneath his tweed jacket and came back gripping a compact silver revolver. "Step away from the console, Mr. Reed." The voice cut through the shadows like a blade. Victor Sterling materialized from the darkness, utterly unbothered by the brutal weather. A suppressed tactical pistol in his hand pointed dead center at Jonathan's chest. 2 heavily armed mercenaries flanked him, red laser dots trembling across the journalist's jacket. "Victor." Chloe's voice shook, but it did not break. __quote _63 ___. You left a digital crater when you pinged that offshore account from the train, Victor said. His face was stone. He leveled his weapon toward the laptop. "Cancel the transfer. Now." "It's a dead man's switch," Jonathan lied without blinking, hands in the air. "I kill the upload. The data splinters and fires itself to 1,000 random inboxes." Victor smirked and closed the distance. "I've called bluffs from far more dangerous men. Shoot him." "Wait!" Chloe threw herself directly between the gunman and Jonathan. "Victor, you don't want this. You don't even know who you're really serving." Victor exhaled a dry, hollow laugh. "I serve your father, Chloe, and he is profoundly disappointed in you." "My father is a marionette," Chloe shouted, her voice ricocheting off the brick. "Beatrice runs the offshore accounts. She runs Beechercroft Holdings. You think she lets you walk away when the dust settles? She detonated the cabin. She murdered Tobias Hayes. She's erasing loose ends, Victor, and you are a loose end. Victor's eyes tightened, barely perceptible. But for a man who built his career on absolute composure, the mention of Beechcroft Holdings landed like a blade. My grandfather didn't just log the shipments, Chloe pressed, reading his fracture. He logged the payments. Look at the screen, Victor. Look at the routing numbers. Jonathan, catching the signal, tapped a single key with surgical precision. The display split in two. Left side, the upload bar crawling past 60%. Right side, a granular ledger detailing enormous recurring transfers from Beechcroft Holdings into a private Swiss account. That's your nest egg, isn't it? Chloe asked. Her heart slammed against her sternum. Check the status. Victor leaned towards a glowing monitor. The field beside his multi-million-dollar Swiss account pulsed in bright red. Liquidated. Funds routed. She drained your accounts an hour ago, Chloe said quietly. The second we got out of that bunker, Beatrice knew the whole structure was caving in. She's incinerating the tray, Victor, and you're standing there holding the match. The factory went dead silent. Only the relentless hammering of rain on metal. The laser dots on Jonathan's chest trembled. Victor's weapon dropped a fraction of an inch. His jaw locked so tight the bone looked ready to crack. He pulled a slim satellite phone from his jacket and hit speed dial. 10 seconds crawled past. The number you have reached is no longer in service. A flat, robotic voice from the speaker. Beatrice had severed the line. Victor stared at the phone, then at Chloe. The cold, methodical enforcer suddenly wore the expression of a man who just realized he was standing on a landmine. He holstered his weapon without a word, signaled his team, turned on his heel, and dissolved into the shadows as fast as he'd materialized. He wasn't going after Beatrice. He was vanishing into the wind. Ding! Chloe and Jonathan spun towards a screen. Solid green. Brilliant, unwavering green. Transfer complete. Packets delivered to 412 global addresses. It's done, Jonathan breathed, sinking back into his chair. It's over. By sunrise, the world Chloe had known lay in ruins. The Carthage files detonated across every major television network and digital outlet on Earth. The volume of evidence was beyond dispute. Interpol issued immediate red notices. The FBI descended on Gallagher Logistics' corporate headquarters in Manhattan. Servers seized, billions in assets frozen overnight. Richard Gallagher was arrested on the manicured lawn of his Greenwich estate. He looked utterly lost as federal agents locked cuffs around his wrists. He had been entirely blind to the scope of Beatrice's shadow empire, but ignorance offered no legal shield. Beatrice nearly slipped through. She was intercepted on a private tarmac at Teterboro, New Jersey, moments from boarding a Gulfstream bound for a non-extradition country. Agents searched her luggage and found millions in bearer bonds, along with a precise detonator frequency used to destroy Nathaniel's cabin. 1 week later, Chloe stood on the scorched, muddy foundation where her grandfather's cabin once rose in the Adirondacks. The federal government had publicly exonerated her of all charges, issuing a formal apology and recognizing her as a national whistleblower. The air bit clean and sharp, thick with pine resin and freshly turned soil. Chloe reached into her pocket and closed her fingers around the heavy, rusted key, the only thing that had survived the fire without a scratch. She'd used the Goldkruger runs to retain the best environmental lawyers in the country. Gallagher Logistics was being systematically dismantled and liquidated. But those pristine 20 acres of mountain forest, they remained hers. Chloe whispered into the wind, her gaze sweeping across the endless sea of green. Her path from disowned teenager to the woman who dismantled an international crime syndicate proved something quiet and permanent. Truth doesn't stay buried. It claws its way out of the dark on its own schedule. If this story hit you somewhere real, leave a like, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more. And one question worth sitting with. What would you have done with the gold? Tell us in the comments.